Getting a Kind of Fighting channel. I wanted to briefly touch on today's interview on The Breakfast Club that featured Oscar De La Hoya. I'm not going to go in any particular order about what they discussed. I just want to touch on a few things that I guess you can say bothered me a little bit. First and foremost, one thing that Charlamagne did and bring up was the fact that 10 years ago there was pictures that leaked with Oscar De La Hoya dressed in drag, basically. It was funny when he brought it up, but to me it wasn't really relevant to the time period now, because again it was about a decade ago when those pictures were taken. I'm not sure exactly when they were released, but to me it was not big a deal. So one thing that I noticed that they didn't bring up, maybe due to ignorance or maybe not knowing, they never mentioned the situation with the racist emails that was sent on behalf of a staff member of GoldenBoy. I don't think anyone's ever really asked Oscar De La Hoya or even Bernard Hopkins about the details as to what happened or what was their take on the situation in general. But as it stands now, it's still up in the air as to what De La Hoya felt or what his role was when it came to those emails in general. Another thing that that was never mentioned in the interview was the fact that De La Hoya, leading up to the fight between Floyd and Conor, was basically saying it was bad for boxing, it's not a good look, it's gonna, basically give the sport of boxing a bad name. However, even before the fight was signed with Floyd and Conor, he was actively pushing in interviews a fight that he wanted to promote between Canelo and Conor, stating that it would look like two Irishmen, two redheads in the ring fighting each other. Granted, one of those videos he did, I believe he was drunk, but the first video that I saw, he was clear-headed, clear-minded, and he really seemed eager to, promote and make that fight happen, because again, he knew that the fight between Conor McGregor, who was probably the biggest name and face in MMA right now, would bring in big dollars against this guy Canelo. And of course, just like with the Floyd fight, most people would ultimately believe that Canelo would defeat Conor McGregor without any real problem. But again, Conor brings enough intrigue in terms of his ability to KO guys and his size and just his fighting ability in general, where it will bring in a lot of dollars and fans, i.e. with the Floyd fight. So those are two things that I noticed that they didn't mention. Again, I don't know if they weren't aware of those two things, but you never know. Another thing I didn't like was the fact that, he kind of sort of felt like he needed to discredit Floyd Mayweather's opponents. And one thing that I felt was kind of contradictory on De La Hoya's behalf is the fact that he did point out that he felt Mayweather, like I said, didn't have solid opponents, or he kept alluding to the fact that he would fight them at the right time, or he's fighting them past their prime, or whatever the case would be, and that, a lot of those fights he was always the heavy favorite, which again is no fault of Floyd's, but a lot of guys that were coming off their biggest wins, or who were champions, who were former champions. So again, it felt like De La Hoya was reaching to find a reason to discredit Floyd. And the main thing that I felt, again, that was contradictory was the fact that I believe 10 of those fights were promoted by GoldenBoy. So, in my opinion, if you felt that a lot of his opposition were subpar, why would you even have those fights be made? Why would you promote them? Again, you bash him, yet you were pretty much the ringleader behind a lot of those fights happening. And the final thing I wanted to touch on is the fact that he was talking about how he admired, while he was bashing Floyd, he also admired Floyd's boxing ability. And in the same breath, he pointed out the fact that as a person, he didn't like Floyd, mainly because of his past with the domestic violence, stating that he's just not a fan of women beaters or women beaters in general. The problem I had with that is, I believe during the time he was going through the court phase and got convicted and sentenced to time in jail for the domestic violence, he was still under the banner of GoldenBoy. So if you were really against the stuff that he did and what you were stating during the interview, why was he still a part of GoldenBoy promotion? Didn't you dismiss him or cut him loose to avoid the backlash that maybe him being a part of your promotion would bring as a convicted, felon, in terms of beating his one of the mothers of his children? I don't know if they were ever officially together, but that's neither here nor there. So those are the few things that bothered me throughout the interview. Again, I don't want to fault the Breakfast Club too much for how the interview played out. I just felt that they didn't ask enough hard-hitting questions that a lot of true boxing fans would have liked to hear a response to. Again, the fishnet and dressing in drag thing, it's funny, but at this point, in terms of boxing and in terms of growing the sport, hearing how you felt about that wasn't really relevant. Yeah, I admit that adversity, um, maybe just as down and turn to drugs during the depressed time period. But in terms of boxing, and it wouldn't have been too bad if they just mentioned it once and then kept it moving. But I think Charlemagne kept kind of pushing that and trying to get more clarity, which I felt wasn't necessary. So again, those are the few things that I observed bothered me. If you saw the interview, let me know what you think. You can view it now, I believe, on. So just give me your comments. How do you feel that, and how do you feel De La Hoya handled? Do you feel that those questions that I mentioned should have been asked? Maybe they didn't want to alienate themselves and not have Oscar maybe come back on the show